Every year, some of the country's top feeder anglers all descend on Hallcroft Fishery in Retford to fish the Feeder Masters Bait Tech Winter Pairs. Now, this is a really, really top competition. It's run expertly by Lee Kerry, Mick Viles and the Feeder Masters team. And like I say, some of the country's top feeder anglers, you're talking your Steve Ringers, your Lee Kerrys, your Adam Wakelins, half of the Barnsley team fish it with Alan Scotthorne, Oliver, loads and loads of top guys, and you need to be at the top of your game, plus you need to draw some good pegs to do well in this league. It's a pairs competition, it's all on weight, so you need to catch a decent weight over the course of 6 rounds throughout the winter months to compete at the end. Now, what I would like to do, we've come inside the kitchen and I want to just talk you through the feeders that myself and a lot of the guys on the league like to use, because it's winter fishing. The target species are skimmers. Carp do count, but they only count as a pound, so they're not really targeted. Most of the fish we're catching are skimmers, bream and roach. So silverfish fishing, small feeders, dark ground bait are the name of the game. I've got a little selection of feeders that I like to use, and like I say, small is the name of the game. So first of all, I'm going to get my feeder that I'm going to call my all-rounder. This is a little Drennan cage feeder, and this feeder is 3 squares. A lot of the time you'll hear people talk about the size of feeders in squares. So this is what we mean. It's a wire feeder and it's 3 squares. So obviously a 5 square feeder is going to be a lot bigger. You can get a 2 square feeder that's a little bit smaller, but it just gives anglers a guide as to what size feeder that you're using. Because in the past it's become confusing to say small, medium, large, extra large, you know, that varies amongst brands, but these squares are pretty consistent. So that's my little Drennan feeder, and I think that is, if you were to pick one feeder, that would probably be it. But I do like to modify this feeder in a couple of different ways. Firstly, I'm not really keen on this big stem. I know it's only a little tiny thing, but that stem's probably 1 inch long. I like to use a stem that's a lot shorter than that, so I'll either cut it down, or the way I modify my feeder to make it a little bit lighter, which I'll show you in a second, naturally obviously shortens that stem already. The reason being is I like to use a feeder link, and I like to govern myself the distance between sort of my feeder and my main line. I don't want too much stem on there swinging on the line. So this feeder is 10 grams, and 10 grams is a pretty lightweight feeder. You know, I could probably plop that with very light main line, maybe get that out to 25 metres, 30 metres, and tighten up to it nicely in the water. A great little feeder. But Hallcroft's a commercial fishery. It's not exactly the deepest place in the world, and I know a lot of other commercials are very, very shallow. The feeder fishing is done often at quite short range. The smaller and the lighter the feeder that you could possibly use in the winter months, the better for me. So I know in the summer the fish are ravenous, they want bait. That splash on the water surface, that's probably going to attract fish. But in the winter, that splash is going to make fish back away, and I want that tiniest plop on the water surface possible. So this is how I like to modify these little Drennan feeders for fishing at short range. I actually cut the lead in half, so we've got 5 grams there. We can still use the prongs inside to attach the stem, and I just move everything down the feeder. So I cut the bottom of half of the lead off, move everything down the feeder, so obviously then that becomes a weight forward feeder. Hopefully you can get everything in there, and then use the original little stem. Now to get that to sit next to the feeder, I just whip a load of braid round the top of that stem, so I'll whip it next to the cage. That keeps the cage together, and you've got really nice lightweight feeder, plops in the water. And the thing is, with a wire feeder, the water can get at the bait really easy, so you're getting maximum attraction from the feeder. If you imagine when you've got tighter mesh or a plastic feeder, there's not as much bait exposed, so it's not as attractive to the fish. So with this feeder, I've got maximum exposure of that bait. I can fish with all different types of ground bait, and I know that however hard I ram my ground bait in that feeder, it's going to, you know, seep out, it's going to absorb into the water and get into the peg. That is a great little feeder to use for, like I say, most of my fishing at a winter commercial when I'm using ground bait. But if I want to fish with really, really sloppy ground baits, which is really attractive to the fish. I can almost use this feeder and feed, not quite liquid, but you know, like a soft paste style ground bait. I can use this bottom weighted feeder. This bottom weighted feeder is also really good if I want to cast a little bit further. It's a little bit windy maybe. I want to zoom a feeder out into a crosswind. This bottom weighted feeder is really good. This is 10 grams, so again, really light. It's only 2 squares, you can see that, but these feeders are available in 3, 4, 5 squares as well. But this little 2 square, 10 grammer, zooms out there, no matter what the conditions. But because the weight is at the base of the feeder, it helps hold that soft ground bait in. So I can maybe add a little bit of water to my ground bait, and we all know how sloppy ground bait, how attractive to the fish that is. You've only got to slop up a bit of ground bait, throw it into the water at your feet, and you can see the cloud that comes from it. Feeder fishing, it's all about manipulating your ground bait consistency, and that little feeder will get the sloppiest of ground baits into your peg. So depending on what ground bait I want to feed and how the fish are feeding, I'll swap between the 2 feeders. But I've got a third feeder, and this one comes out when the fishing, to be fair, is really good, because this feeder is for getting my bait to the bottom all in one piece, zooming it to the bottom, zooming the fish to the bottom, because quite often the fish aren't sitting on the bottom, they're quite often sitting mid-water, and you need to pull the fish down with each little feeder full. And by ramming the bait into this feeder, it's not much smaller than the feeders I've just showed you, but I can ram the bait into this feeder. It's a tiny cage from Preston, and I've modified it again by shortening the stem down. I can almost get it to work like a little tiny window feeder, in that the feeder bombs to the bottom, no bait comes off it, the fish follow the feeder down, there's no loose feed, there's nothing there for them to eat apart from the hook bait, which is obviously, that's ultimately what we want them to eat. So this feed is great when I've got a few fish in the area and I feel like all I need to do is just catch them rather than attract them into the peg. Because let's face it, with no bait coming off this feeder as it falls through the water, and quite often I can ram the bait in this feeder and reel the bait back in every single cast, which sometimes can be a good thing, believe it or not. You're not leaving anything in your peg, everything's clean out there, and you know, you're not overfeeding the fish, but whilst putting some attraction in the water. Only works for a little bit. I've got to say that you probably get 3-4 fish doing this with this style of fishing, because you have got to feed, and then we swap back to either the little wire cage or my little really open little cage feeder. Little tiny feeders, trust me, they catch you loads of fish this time of year, and by using a little feeder you can be far busier. So a lot of people at Hallcroft, you see it, it's 2-3 minute casts, it's in and out. Because we're using these little feeders, we're not putting loads of bait in the water. If you were to sit there, maybe cast out a feeder that was twice that size, 3 times that size, and then sit there, you could be sitting 10-15 minutes waiting for a bite, because obviously the initial splash is going to scare a few fish away. It's going to take them a little bit longer to gather around the feeder. Plus there's a lot more bait there, so naturally those fish are a little bit spookier. They're not going to pick up your hook bait because there's so much choice as well. So little feeder, be very active. I would say those 3 styles of feeder, and get them in there, are all you need for your winter feeder fishing.